right?
Okay, we are live. This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we are talking to the Power Couple. I am a podcaster, a music producer, and musician myself. We've been doing podcasts since 2018, previously on Anchor FM, and now we're doing these new video podcasts on StreamYard. Oh, is that an airplane? We're talking to the Los Angeles-based alternative R&B duo Power Couple, and they're composed of multi-instrumentalist John Lall and Jasmine. I hope I got your names right. And glad to welcome you to the show.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I sent some questions that we like to get into, but we do have your song Higher Love on YouTube. So sometimes I like to play, if I could play that, and then we could talk to it, because it kind of gives the audience a chance to understand your music by actually hearing it.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So I'll put you on mute for a second, and we'll switch over to that. So hold a second. I'll put you on mute, and then we'll go into that.
I can't believe I'm with you. I'm in a fantasy. This is the moment in the scene where the sun and the ocean meet. Believe I'm with you. I'm in a fantasy. This is the moment in the scene where the sun and the ocean meet. Moving in time with your heart and breathing with the beat. I can't believe I'm with you. I'm in a fantasy. This is the moment in the scene where the sun and the ocean meet. Moving in time with your heart and breathing with the beat. We are the moon and the sea. There's a pull that you have on me. Love me with the higher love. Love me with the higher love. Love me with the higher love. With the higher love. When I give in to your touch and you give in to me, turn off our thoughts and release our control of the way we feel. A little bit of adrenaline got me shivering, lifting me up. I don't know if we're in heaven here, but I've never been this high above. Love me with the higher love. Love me with the higher love. Love me with the
Hi, I'm back, and I think I got you guys back, and I'm gonna remove the screen here. So now we got both of you back on. You can hear
Great.
me? Yeah.
Yep.
So I wanted to give the audience a good example of your music, so hopefully that came through. And I also wanted to kind of give you a little bit of background from what I've read. Is you guys have been working on this four-part project called Blocks, and you started with Feel in 2019, and you showcased like your jazz, hip hop, electronic influences. And then you had a follow-up single called Like Fire, celebrated International Women's Day in 2020. And then phase 2 of Blocks is slated for this year, right? And it's going to go with a short film as well. Is that my I'm up to date? Yeah. Okay. So I guess the first question I always go back a little bit is when did you guys first get into music? Who wants to start? Like, at what age did you decide that music was like?
She should jump in. She's been at it. She got it younger than I think.
Yeah, I started as a kid. My family they were all musicians. My dad was getting his master's in classical piano, or bachelor's, so he was like playing for hours when I was sleeping in the crib. So I think it just sort of assimilated into my body, and I really wanted to play piano. So I started that first and singing. My mom was a singer, and just have like a long line of musicians in my family. So I was involved in music from before I can remember, even before talking. They would say I would just sit in my crib and sing. So
Which is
it was
cool.
early for me.
That's pretty cool. I wish I had. I don't have a story like that. Now, I did grow up singing in church. That was like the extent of it. So I think it really wasn't until college that I kind of took music seriously. Before that, yeah, I sang in church. I attempted to play guitar for like a month. That didn't really work out. I didn't have the patience or the wherewithal at the time. I think I knew I always loved music. I just wasn't sure I had the capacity for it. And then I figured it out later.
So I guess the other question I always ask to go along with that is like how long have you been like working in music? Once you realized that you had a voice for it, like once you realized that you could write your own music, I guess, because a lot of times people get into music and they don't write their own music. They work professionally, but they don't write their own music. So what made you feel that you could write your own music?
For me, I was writing music first. Like I was just creating. I wrote really ridiculous emotional songs when I was a little kid that were just so dramatic for no reason. And I think it's because my parents were both songwriters. So I kind of just felt normal to be writing all the time and creating songs. I thought that was more fun than learning other people's songs, which I've developed a great respect for now. But for me, it was pretty early on. I think it's because I had the encouragement and support of my family that I, felt confident in that area. And it was a really good outlet for me as kind of a dramatic and emotional kid.
And I'd say for me, I started writing music almost as soon as I figured out, how to play an instrument. I think, up until that point, music kind of lived in my head, ideas, melodies, and song structures and that sort of thing. I just never really knew how to put it out. And then once I really actually sat down and learned the guitar, that's when almost as soon as I learned like 3 or 4 chords, I was just like, I'm going to write songs. And it wasn't like a struggle or anything like that. I think mostly because it had lived in me for so long, being a fan of music, I knew what I wanted my voice to sound like. It's a journey, but I knew I wanted it to go in a certain way.
Well, even before you played guitar, you were writing songs. I remember the first day I met him, he was like, he didn't know how to play any instruments. We were met at Berkeley he was there for voice. And he was like telling the guitar player, like F sharp, C sharp minor, And like he had this ear for it, but he couldn't actually play it. But he had written songs, and you didn't know how to play guitar or any instrument. So I thought that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I always had like I've always had an ear for music. I just, you know, it took me a while to have the discipline to play it.
Mm.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's super quiet. I think we can't hear you.
You can hear me now?
A little bit, yeah.
Hear me better?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there we go. You can hear me.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think as a musician myself, I started like on a clarinet, and then that's not really a writing instrument. And I kind of grew up in the '80s, right? So I saw Duran Duran, I saw all these new wave bands, and so I went looking in the pawn shops for like mini Moogs and Jupiters, whatever I could find, and
Yeah.
I just decided I was in all these punk bands, and then people stopped showing up, and then I realized like if I had a synthesizer, I could write everything myself. So that's how I and I kept on going because everybody else would get married, you know, have relationships and drop in and out of it, and bass player wouldn't show up. But it's like it's just the passion of once you realize that you learn your instrument and then you learn what you want to do with it and how you want to bring your voice out. I think that's when you really start getting something unique, and that's why I like to talk to a lot of independent songwriters. Is this because you can really get into a window like a writer. Music is like reading great novels or short stories to me. And as a fan of music and I'm a musician myself, I love talking to musicians just to figure out where they're coming from and their journey and how they actually got into it. And so it's really cool for me to get into that. I think that's a big part of the whole scene. And it's why I like to talk to folks like you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think the other follow-up question is, I guess, how your writing style in terms of like your inspirations and your reference points, like who inspired you as a musician. Not that everything like you name check somebody and then you sound like them, but it's kind of like to me as a musician, like your influences kind of make who you are.
Mhm.
So who wants to go first in terms of like your references or your the people that you kind of looked up to kind of create your sound?
Well, it's funny. In reading that question, I said to Summer that I think and I think you kind of touched on it a little bit yourself right now, that there's a difference between your influences and your reference points, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like your influences, I have so many influences. Not all of them are a reference point per se, just because, you know, they wouldn't all like a really random one I told her is like, there's this rock band called the Deftones. And I just think that they just crush it. I mean, they just, you know, Chino Moreno and Abe Cunningham on drums. They're just like, they literally, the things they were doing, I thought were just way ahead of what music, what rock especially was doing at the time. However, that being said, not a reference point at all for any of the music we make, but I do count them as an influence just because there's something about it that just spoke to me. But influences, yeah, everything, and there's so many influences. I always say Stevie Wonder, Johnny Hathaway, Marvin Gaye, that's one block, and then, you know,
Those are the days.
I was going to say, it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard. You know, current music, like there's D'Angelo, and there's Jack Garrett, there's I could go on, honestly, I could go on forever, but you should say.
I want to shout out current people that I feel like we love and deserve it. With so talented. That'd be like Phil Monroe, Yoe.
That's
It's still now, but that is, I love it. Gabrielle Garcia Montano. We love like current artists like Pentagram, say, Masego, Moonchild, Keeper. But growing up, I listened to, like I said, classical music. I really loved Bach. I love Tori Amos, super songwriters. Like the whole Lilith Fair thing was
Yeah, yeah.
Loved Lauren Hill. Yes.
I got to get into hip hop because hip hop was just such a huge base for us. It's funny just in different ways though. Like I don't think it was as upfront for you, but my older brother. Okay, you probably remember this. Because back in the day, like when you would just cover your books, did you have to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the kids don't have to do that anymore. They don't understand. You had to cover your books back in the day, right? You do like the brown paper bag, wrap it around a book or whatever, right?
Yeah.
My father was like a pro at that. So he would do it for me, but his rule was he would write the names of artists on my paper covers, right? All these artists, and I had to listen to them no matter what. If I liked it or not, I had to listen to them. So he would put stuff like, NWA, Sonny Rollins, Coltrane, Tribe, Public Enemy, like all sorts of stuff. Like Bill Evans, just crazy, like things I would not have even dreamed to have listened to. And because he did that, that's exactly what I loved.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think, like a part of what I do in my music is like, I call it expansive sound because I don't want to get pinned down into a genre. So basically like, I like Sun Ra. I like Stevie Ray Vaughan, I like Johnny Cash, I like Dylan, I like Funkadelic. I like Bernie Worrell. I like Yes, I like Genesis. So if you're a synthesizer player, and I'm into all these Moogs and Jupiters and Prophets, you kind of have to go a little progressive rock, right? That's kind of foundational. You're gonna, Keith Emerson, even a guy like Pete Townsend. Because the one thing about Pete Townsend is like you think about it, he's a guitar player, but his approach on the synthesizer is very innovative. And it's just like Eddie Van Halen's approach on an Oberheim, on Jump. And so, like, if you're a keyboard player, a lot of times you're like, wow, this guitar player actually looked at the synthesizer. And you think about, like, Barbara O'Reilly or Won't Get Fooled Again. The way Pete Townsend approached synthesis actually informed tons of other synthesizer players since then on how you actually program a synthesizer, how you create those sequencers, what you do, what effect they can have. And so I think it's interesting, like, when people from different genres, like bend genres or mixed genres. I think that's really what's cool in today's music, with hip hop, pulling from jazz and R&B pulling from hip hop. Is just a lot of cross modulation. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's necessary. I think most of us don't listen to one type of music. We listen to everything. Our playlists,
Eclectic.
Exactly. So there's everything on there. I just always think that the industry does a pigeonhole you with the owner or style. Like that's for them. The label is supposed to be to get this doesn't make a market, but your listeners don't care. They just want to listen to music.
Well, if you think about a Spotify playlist, the way people listen to music, it could have very eclectic taste. It doesn't all have to be EDM. It doesn't all have to be DJ. It doesn't have to. If you check a lot of people's playlists, it's like it's a little bit of everything, and that's kind of cool because I think that's where people's heads at. But the only thing I think that's missing is like I'm a child of the '70s, so I grew up with albums. Yeah. So and I grew up with vinyl. So I listened to the Carpenters like close to the whole way through as a kid because my parents, that's what they did. They had the vinyl. I listened to Intervisions, Songs in the Key of Life. I'm listening to all that stuff like all the way through. Pink Floyd all the way through. Zeppelin 4 all the way through because that's kind of what I still approach my music in terms of like albums and concepts. But most people just digest it as a part of a playlist and little short singles. Everything's under 3 minutes. I see that you're working on these projects, but you've kind of spaced them out with what you're doing with blocks. So maybe you can talk about like your concept for blocks and is it intended at the end to be like an EP or an album? But what's the flow for that?
Yeah, what you were saying, I totally agree. Like that concept of a whole journey that you go on with the artist has been a bit long. But the thing with playlist is all about emotion. So like the playlist has a feeling to the vibe, right? And I think that's what we're going with these different EPs is each one has its own feeling or vibe. So it's the first one's called Feel, and then there's Mind, then it's going to be Vibe, and then Type. And when you write songs, they all fit in one box. So it's like box or blocks, and them in the categories that they fit, like their little song family. With the overall goal of, releasing it as a larger project, because I'm a fan, like you said, of listening to things from start to finish in the order they were intended to tell a story. And that's why this next EP is going to be going with a film, because it is telling a story that is still revealing itself to us as we go, which is what I love about art. Like, you don't always like know everything at the start, right? Like, you figure it out too as the artist. It's writing us. But the whole concept of blocks was something that John came up with, which is like writer's block that we deal with, but also like building blocks and how we build each other up and how we build together in collaboration. And also we're always in Los Angeles next to construction. So we've done like a lot of ideas, like what does it mean, construction and interior and exterior. And so we've just been playing with all of those different themes. And that's kind of the concept behind, the block series, the 4 phases that we've been working on.
Right. Each one of them is going to kind of cover the ground of, where we're at and how we approach, the music that we write. It's, I think for every musician, you want to write something that inspires you. And inspiration is such a wide palette. Like, it's not just, inspired to be happy. It's not just inspired to be, to write the saddest song. It's inspiration to, accurately depict and describe the state of being that you're in. And that changes at any given time. So, what we've done with what we're doing with these blocks is trying to, put them together so that, as we are as human beings, we are put together with blocks, whether it's a vibe, whether it's a mood, whether it's a feel, whether it's, living cerebrally in our minds. There's so many things. That's where the concept kind of lies.
Yeah. Nobody's just one thing.
That's kind of cool, because that kind of reminds me of I am a child of the concept album, like Tommy, Quadrophenia, and the idea that you can have these long form ideas. So the visual filming, like I kind of got into music, loving like the Velvet Underground and Andy Warhol and his, art collective, and the whole idea that you could merge that kind of art. Like if you look at the first Velvet Underground album with the banana on it, and it actually would peel off as a sticker. And that kind of merging of art in the 60s and 70s was very common. You have really, awesome artists linking up, visual artists, commercial artists, graphic artists, working with the Dead, working with all these bands and doing all this interesting work that wasn't necessarily trying to be commercial, but it was just trying to pick up on a feel. You find an artist that, okay, that feels like the Dead. So that it has that vibe. So then, it has that Haight-Ashbury thing going on. Or you have like the Allman Brothers, and you have their vibe and everybody's vibe. Is this cool to have like a complete thought in music, and it's not just a beat? Not
Right.
That's bad, but I kind of grew up with the singer-songwriter aspect. What you guys were talking about, blocks, is coming from that classic singer-songwriter kind of concept. That you're like a novelist, you're like a short story writer, you're a poet, and you're trying to convey something that's going to trigger the audience to maybe have a memory, and they picture, music. I like concept that I think a lot of people have heard before is like sound painting. If you think about like the Beatles, and you think about Sgt. Pepper, that's the beginning of like the sound painting. And Hendrix, people asked him about Electric Ladyland, and they asked him like, "What are you trying to do?" And he said, "What's the sound painting?" Because you hear it, there's like birds and there's ocean waves and there's all this stuff and these long 8-minute, 10-minute songs, and you're like, what is all this? What is he trying to do? And it's this idea that you can use the studio, you can use your musical capabilities to kind of draw something bigger than what you can do live, bigger than what you can actually do as you know, just a unit there you were showing up live. But now with computers and synthesizers, you can actually replicate that live. But you know, previously it was harder to do. But
Yeah, it's interesting you say sound painting because our next song that we've been working on is called Monet, and it's totally inspired by the works of Monet and like what that would mean today. And actually, part of the movie involves a painting that we go into and explore, and so, like we really resonate with that term. And I've always heard it as like soundscape as well, like soundscaping, you know. So.
It's interesting because I'm like, at the story with the Beatles is, I don't know if people had understood, is like Peter Sellers, they're like the fifth Beatle, George Martin, had been producing all these Peter Sellers comedy records, and they required all this overdubbing, and they required like special effects and orchestras and tons of overdubs, and the Beatles were fans of those Peter Sellers records, and I saw in this documentary that he used a lot of those techniques on those Peter Sellers comedy albums to actually create that kind of Sgt. Pepper vibe, which became like the standard because it took all these things that were being done in production of like comedy records, but it actually then applied to rock and roll, and suddenly you had all these new studio techniques that could be utilized to create this kind of picture. And in the documentary, he talks about like you know, I could just record the Beatles like they sound in Germany, in Berlin, or I could record them like it's like a Monet. He actually talked about impressionism and talked about how I can actually color the sound in the studio and make it be a little bit more or different than what you could really do live. And that's when it started to move from like the move from the early Beatles sound to that more psychedelic sound and spacious sound that you hear it later. But,
yeah, you can kind of hear that transformation through those next few albums after Help, like Revolver, and
yeah,
you can kind of hear it a little bit in Rubber Soul, which I know was before Help, but like you could kind of hear, or was it before Help or just after Help?
I think it might just after maybe.
It might have been, yeah, it might have been Help, then Rubber Soul, then Revolver, but you can start to hear that kind of mutation into what it's going to be and how they're going to just like, you know, completely change, you know, what everyone thinks they are, even though they don't think they're changing, because that's just a natural evolution of what it means to be a musician. The more you discover about yourself and the more you discover about music, the more you want to play with those colors, you know?
Yeah, and you're reflecting the times too. They were evolving with the society that was changing rapidly at that time. But from that idea of like the painting, the soundscape, I feel like that was kind of unique about Higher Love because we tried all these different like regular drum beats and they sounded fine, but they weren't like working. It wasn't the specialness. We wanted something different. And so we approached it from like a soundscape perspective. Like we used me breathing as almost like a symbol to move it along, and like different percussion instruments. And that was the way to create that ambiance.
I think that's really interesting because a lot of the progressive rock bands are kind of famous for doing like field recordings and then taking like synthesizers, the early Moog modulars, and you know, just layering all these kind of shadow tracks, right? So you would build up, you'd have maybe some kind of glass breaking, or you take a field recording outside, or you hit something, a stick or something. You did something. You bring it in because it's like that the drum wasn't working, so you use something else, and then you bring that in. And then, you know, I was watching a documentary with Peter Gabriel. He was talking about, he actually did on So, he had his drummer do like all these 99 cuts of a drum track. They spliced the tape. They were actually using tape, and they cut it into 99 splices, and they rearranged the whole track. It took it, he played it straight, and then they actually took it and rearranged it. That's kind of like Genesis.
Like collage.
Yeah, that's kind of a George Martin Genesis. It's an old progressive trick. Like you take something and you just totally rearrange it on the tape, and tape splicing and moving it around. People do it today with like samplers. They'll take a sample and then they'll move it around.
Chop it.
It's a lot more. It's
cool when you do that compared to like taking like an Ice Ice Baby, where you take a David Bowie track and you just change the lyrics over it, versus taking a sample of something, kind of resampling it and then spreading it out on a multi-sample and then clipping it up and rearranging it. And we end up doing like maybe like a Bomb Squad hip hop level production or De La Soul hip hop production where you have a lot going on, so much going on you can't tell the source of the original sample.
That always it's funny that I can't, when you say something like that, I can't help but want to shout out Kanye West for one of my favorite tracks he's ever done. He did this on Common's, like, I don't know which album it was, like fifth or sixth. It's called Finding Forever, and the song is called The People. And he sampled this Gil Scott-Heron track, We Almost Lost Detroit. And if you listen to that song, that's a deep song, right? Like that's a powerful song on its own, and it's slow and it's methodical, and it really, it drags you into the feeling, right?
Yeah.
Kanye's flip on that is like twice the speed. It's chopped up in, like, you would not be able to tell that it's from that song, but you don't lose any of the emotion out of it at all. And of course, because it's Common, you're also not going to lose any of the lyrical value either. You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, it's one of the, that's going back to influences. That song has influenced me ever since it came out. Like, I think that was like 2006. But when I heard that song, I was like, this is the standard for what hip hop should be. If you're gonna sample, this is the way to do it. If you're gonna spit, this is the way to do it. This is hip hop.
Yeah, like I kind of feel like way about MF Doom. His choice on how he did that. He took these obscure Fantastic Four clips and then mixed them with these other clips, and then had his vocal style. He had a guy like Earl Sweatshirt. He kind of does that a mimic of that, or a new version of it. With some rap songs, he kind of totally translated into a brand new type of MF Doom. But I've always been very interested. Like, I said, I love bands like Sun Ra. I mean, Sun Ra was a classic bebop jazz band that kind of turned into a Parliament Funkadelic of jazz.
Right.
Space is the place is kind of like where Miles was, where like Bitches Brew. But they had started with like Jazz and Silhouette. And that's a classic bebop 55, 54, 56, around that time period. Totally different band, really tight bebop. But then they went into this thing that was like pre-Funkadelic. They looked like Funkadelic before Funkadelic. They dressed up like space aliens on stage. And I think George Clinton took a little of that. But that's always been my inspiration, is like that you can take all these various things. And it's the feeling, really. Like, if you listen to Hendrix, like, I'm a keyboard player and I want to be a guitar player, but I can't play guitar. I try to get my Moogs to do Hendrixian things, but just because a Moog is closer to being able to do that than like a digital synth. And it's just a feeling. Like, if I listen to a Hendrix, it's like, it's not that I'm trying to copy him. I'm trying to get that feel of where his head's at. And if you listen to like hundreds of Hendrix songs, and I'm a total Hendrix freak, it kind of comes in to your consciousness, and whether or not you want it to, you'll kind of just start, just like if you pull a Coltrane melody, suddenly you're playing something and the Coltrane melody pops out. Just when you're playing like jazz, this stuff pops out. You just start pulling something from Bach or pulling something from here or pulling something from there. That's just, to me, the cool thing of music, and a lot of that seems to get lost with the sequencers and the DAWs, and people don't want to go that way anymore as much. But tools are cool, but I kind of like live performance. What do you guys feel about live performance?
Well, we miss it.
I love it. Yeah, we miss it a lot, but I like it live more than online.
Yeah, we haven't really done the online performing thing. Like, I have a lot of respect for people that are doing that, and I think it's been really done well during the pandemic, especially. Like, I'm seeing some setups that are just like super inspiring for when we do go back to doing live music. I think the thing we both agree on is there's a energy. Summer, I always give her credit for this because I think it's just maybe also one of the things that's inspired me the most is she's a music therapist as well. And she's reminded me that, at the foundation of music, before it was anything else, before it was this platform to be famous, before it was this, thing that we all cling to as, a status for how to be cool or this or that, music was about community. And she goes into this much better than I do, but it's such an inspiring thing because it reminds me constantly how there's a community out there for every single musician. I'm saying like not just other musicians too. There's a community of people who like they will love what you do. Sometimes you gotta work hard. You gotta find them, but there's fans out there for everything. There really are.
Yeah, and performing is amazing because it's kind of like that feeling of community again. And I think the more involved the audience is, the better. And we kind of, if you can get rid of the whole like audience and performer stereotype, and like we're all just in this music thing together right now, and this energy. And the cool thing about live is it's like you're never gonna have the same show twice. Like you just can't recreate the experience. And so you get bands like Coldplay, they're like super interactive, or even Ozone Motley going into the crowd, and obviously hip hop with the call and response and the back and forth. All that's drawing from our roots, when we would make music as a community, is the only way to hear it was to create it together. There was no recorded music at all. So if you wanted it, you had to do it.
Yeah. So there's a collaboration between musicians, people who just, or non-musicians, just anybody could collaborate and make music. But part of that live performance energy is that audience is giving you power. That audience is giving you strength. That audience is giving you courage. And in return, you want to give them the best of yourself. That synergy exists very exclusively, I think, kind of in person in that way. It's hard when you can't see your audience, you can't feel your audience.
It's a really magical exchange.
Well, I think a good example, I used to go see the Allman Brothers, and I would go see multiple shows just because they fed off the audience. And I get it because I'm a keyboard player, and like if I play in a club and everybody's getting it, then I'm going to go off of my Hammond B3 and my Moog, and I'm going to do something based on what the crowd is giving me. And I feel like Dickie Betts and Greg Allman, they feed off the crowd. And if the crowd's really getting into it, then they kind of go in a different direction. And every night that I would see them, like 2 nights in a row, and it was different. And it's kind of like Pearl Jam was different like that. Like you go see Eddie Vedder, you could go see a Pearl Jam show twice on the same weekend, and he would change the lyrics of the songs.
Right.
I actually saw Dylan used to do that with some of his classic, like Blood on the Tracks album, where he had multiple lyrics for different songs, like Idiot Wind and Tangled Up in Blue. He had different versions of the songs. And some, if you would see him on one night, he'd run a passage that was like on an outtake. He'd run that set of lyrics, and then the next night he'd run a different set of lyrics. He'd bounce them around, just based on however he felt. And it's kind of cool. Like if you're a music fan and you know these little details, you're like, that we're always fans of other musicians. That's why I do this podcast, because we're our own community, and that's what I've been doing with this. Is I talk to musicians all over the world to kind of keep that going, even though we can't physically be in a studio or something, but you can keep this kind of connection going.
Yeah, and I've to that same thing, Prince was like that.
The same thing.
We were lucky, got to see Prince when he was doing the 21 shows at the Forum in LA. Wow, yeah. And I got to go to like 4 of them. Because people weren't going. Like they were like, oh, well, he's there for 21 nights. Like, I'll go catch him next week or whatever. I'm like, no, I want to go to every single one. I'm there. Like however many tickets I can get, I'm going. And every show was different. Every single show was different. And depending on the energy, he'd come out and do one encore. No, one night he didn't do any encores because he was like, y'all aren't feeling this.
You don't appreciate the genius in front of you.
Prince. You don't appreciate what I'm doing? Seriously, I don't have to do 21 shows. He was doing it to save the Forum, which he did. And then
only Prince could pull off 21 shows in the same
He's
location.
Like, I'm going to stay here and play, and we're going to raise enough money to keep the Forum open and alive. And he did it. And you know, the very first show I saw him do, he did like 4 encores. It was like, and of course he can, because he's got the catalog to do it. And he can literally play Purple Rain for like 25 minutes. No one's going to say anything. We're just going to sit there and listen. It's Prince.
Yeah, I actually saw him at Paisley Park.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was in Minneapolis, and he used to do these low shows, right? And he had this power trio. And
yeah.
Totally. And I have like every Prince bootleg everywhere, but I'm not supposed to have. But so I'm a total purple head, and so you get there at 11 o'clock, you wouldn't get on stage until like 2. but you would hear all these outtakes. Like if you sat in the crowd, you'd have like, you know, grape juice and like all this non-alcoholic stuff, you know, and snacks and cookies and whatever. You would sit around, but it wasn't like boring because he would start running all these outtakes or unreleased material. He would just run them on the speakers, and you have a DJ running all this stuff that wasn't released.
Right.
And suddenly he come on stage with his power trio with Sonny T and Michael B, and they start doing all this like Undertaker, like Hendrixian power, like, you know, like it's like a total different type of setup that he did. Once in a while in Europe you could see him do that, but it was rare in the U.S. that you actually saw him do that. Unless you went to Paisley, you could see him do it, and I was like, oh my god, you know.
That's crazy.
Underrated, and his, you know, he could do Clapton, Hendrixian, you know, he could do Santana-like stuff. And and when in that power trio, because he was limited, he didn't have the full band, he was going that way, and it was pretty cool to see him do that.
Yeah, that must have been amazing, especially at Paisley Park. That must have been so cool.
Oh yeah, he was at home and he was just like, I'm gonna do what I want.
Right.
So I was like, oh, I'm cool with that. You know, that's what I wanted to see. I actually wanted to see him do the rare stuff. You know, the stuff the stuff he doesn't play every night. You know, but
right.
I think that's what's cool. You know, I think like one thing I was reading this biography about the Eagles, and I think they kind of caused a lot of trouble for themselves because like during like the Hotel California tour, I heard that they kind of made the band. They did like a James Brown thing to the band. They like fined the band unless they played Hotel California like exactly like the record. Like every night they were told they had to play it. Don Henley and you know, Glenn Frey were telling the whole band they had to play it straight. Don't change it.
Wow.
The same every night, and that's a good way to blow up the band.
Oh, for sure.
You know,
for sure.
That takes the whole fun. I mean, that's like why do you go see the Dead? Why do you go see Funkadelic? Why do you see the Allman? Because every night it was different. It's not because every night it's the same.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
So don't burn the fun out of the band, you know?
Right.
You might as well just listen to the record.
Exactly. Just stay home and listen to the record.
So this whole project with the movie, that's really, you know, cool. It's a cool idea because like I said, I'm big into rock operas. A lot of stuff I do a lot of visual stuff. I have been doing things online for many years. Out of my home studio, I get up, you know, people know me. I have a mask, I have LEDs, I have like this hoodie. I got this whole persona as the ghost. You know,
that's dope.
Well, it's just the whole idea. To me, like David Bowie they asked him like, why do you do Ziggy? Why do you do the Aladdin Sane? Why do you do that? I said, well, you know, I could just get up there with my blue jeans, and he did as David Jones. He never went anywhere. And then when it became David Bowie and Ziggy, he said, right. Well, I'm going to bring theater because it's going to give people a show. And that's why Prince, you know, every album had a persona. You know, you had the kid in Purple Rain, then you had this other character with the cloud suit for Around the World in a Day, and then the kind of bikini look, and he just had different looks for every album, like the way Bowie did.
Yep.
The way that Freddie Mercury did. There's something about having that stagecraft and bringing in a show with visuals or doing art, I think is important than to just come out. You know, I guess if you're a singer-songwriter and you're playing acoustic guitar, then maybe you want to be more toned down. But
yeah, I mean, we've done that too. You know, we both come from that background of singer-songwriter a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, just a guitar, just a piano. She's gifted at both, but I don't really. I try to play the keys. It's a very, very, very loose interpretation of playing the keys. But that being said, like, yeah, like I would say that as far as like the movie and characters and that sort of thing, I think I've always respected artists who knew who they were in one capacity and knew who they were in another. So like, Prince isn't Prince Rogers Nelson. You know what I mean? Like Prince is Prince. You know what I mean? Like that's who he is. At home, he might be different. We don't know that, and that's okay because we don't need to know that. You know what I'm saying? Like, uh, but when you know your limitations on one front, and then sometimes putting on that costume takes you out of those limitations. Or gives you a different headspace, or gives you a different, frame of mind. A viewpoint that's allows you to be more creative or more expressive. And I think with the movie, we're very, very lucky. Our next door neighbor, our director,
Sam Singer.
Sam Singer, is super creative and super inclusive and very, what's the word I'm looking
He's
for?
open, like he's willing and open to try anything.
He's also very
experimental.
He's experimental. He's creative. He's
hardworking.
Hardworking. He's
It's a good partnership.
Honestly, yeah, a great partnership. He's a kindred spirit to us. We both love that kind of open to experimenting and seeing what can come about. But I think being a character is important sometimes, like because it can take you out of your own fears or your own self-imposed limitations.
I think a big thing as musicians is like they've talked a lot about like when you think your identity is your music or you get so wrapped up into it that you feel really vulnerable, and with the first like bad critique or criticism you're like, I'm done, I give up, or I want to hide. So there's something about having a character, a persona that gives you a little buffer, and it's like, no, this isn't me, this is just my costume. And it's been fun to make the movie because we've gotten to delve into acting a little bit. We both have a bit of an acting background, but we hadn't done it in years. So it's been really fun. And like you're saying, like there's different costumes, we're different characters. And it's been such a great learning experience. But first and foremost, it's just been a blast.
So much fun. And the other thing to it is like we've always I think we've always wanted to tell a story with the music. I'm sure you probably relate to this easily, but I always see whenever I'm writing anything, there's a visual in my head already. There's something that's going on in there. Sometimes it's, a very, very detailed story, and I just see it. It could be a cartoon. It could be like us acting. It could be totally other people acting, or it could just be colors. But some way or another, there's always something. I hear a beat, I see something. I hear keys, I see something. I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think she's the same way. And like this idea of like there's something more. Like the music gives you more, and you want to share it through a visual medium.
Yeah, I think it's the whole idea. Like there's different ways you can go at it. Like sometimes I come at things like with a psychedelic kind of aspect, where it's kind of like it doesn't actually go with the song. Like the visuals have like nothing to do with the song. They're kind of just out there to kind of like take you into this other space. But then there's songs where you actually, my daughter's a cartoonist, so we'll actually have a storyline run like a cartoon, and run it like the Gorillas or something. But I think it's interesting, this whole idea of like the other me. I've really gotten into, because part of what I did with the Ghosts is like for many years I was just playing myself, and I didn't have stagecraft or anything, and then I never really sang. I was just a keyboardist, right? And I didn't feel comfortable singing, so then I got into vocoders, and I created a female version of my voice through my vocals. And as soon as I created this character called Josephine Electric, I said, well, I don't want to dress up like Bowie, I don't want to be like Camille. So I decided to be a phantom, so you couldn't tell who I was. So I have this idea of phantom. I wear like a cape that's LED, and I've got a phantom mask.
Wow.
You can't tell who I am. But then what makes it work is I can have this female voice, but I don't have to dress in a dress. I have this kind of this binary kind of thing where it's a ghost. And
Yeah, gender neutral.
Female, and then the female voice can come out, or the deep male voice can come out, and it doesn't matter because I've got this stagecraft that has this capability to do it. So I played in New York, and I was in this club, and I didn't know how people were going to react to this female voice coming out of a guy, you know, and it's coming out in real time. But I've got this kind of subterfuge as this other me as this phantom, and the people couldn't really tell, and it worked. And it's been working ever since. I actually have more fans now with my mask on than I did without it.
Yeah, there's definitely artists like Sia is like, you know, she kind of hides a little bit. The Gorillas, in a sense, you know what I mean? Like before they were doing live shows. Yeah. There's a bunch of other acts that are like that. I like that. But even like going back to Bowie, you know, the whole kind of like androgynous, like there is no form. Like the form is whatever I want it to be. You know what I mean? Like I respect that a lot. The idea of like, you know, I think especially this younger generation, you know, how they go into, you know, fluidity and, you know, the idea of just being is interesting. And I think that you're hearing it in the music, the way the music's reflected. I hear people talk about hip hop now, and they call it like mumble rap. And you don't have to like it, but I think it's interesting how it's approached. I always think of it as like, you know, they're getting back to the roots of community in a sense. Because like when you feel out of touch with music, like, you know, you look at people as like, only they can do that. I can't do that. But like the idea of mumble rap, it's just like, it's just a flow. It's just like, this is how I talk. This is what I do. This is who I am. And it's just put out there.
I think it's like punk rock. If you think about it, like punk rock was a rejection of how the progressive and the big rock bands had gotten like so out of touch.
Yeah.
They were like big 300,000 people in the crowd, and I can't get close to the band anymore. And it seemed like, well, they're so much more Jimmy Page. I could never be Jimmy Page. I could never be Robert Plant. You know, nobody could ever be like that. But then you see Johnny Rotten. Well, I could be like him.
Right.
Like Joy Division, I could do that. You know, I could do New War. I could do that. And so in the Clash, you know, like I don't have to be the perfect singer. I just got to have heart and attitude. I think mumble rap is kind of like that. And then like it's kind of got this punk aesthetic where you can come in and say, hey, I can do it, just like the Clash did it, just like Johnny Rotten did it, like Nirvana did it. And like that's how Kurt Cobain kind of brought back rock by bringing it back to bare bones and saying, I can just have a lot of heart and a lot of passion. I don't have to have the perfect voice. I think that punk aesthetic is always good. You know, I think it's always driven a really interesting dynamic. I mean, even think about like REM. Early REM, you can't hear what Michael Stipe is saying at all. But actually, I kind of like the IRS REM because there was a lot of mystery, kind of like a mumble rapper, in what Stipe was saying. You couldn't really tell, but you're listening to The Reckoning and you're like, that's really cool, but I don't know what he's saying because they kind of give you this imagination to it. It's kind of like, it's like jazz in a way. I didn't have to know what he was saying. I just liked the hook.
Right.
You know, and it was cool. And I think that's where you get into like punk and kind of like, you know, there's a cyberpunk and other types of trap that get really deep beats and stuff that you don't recognize maybe the lyrics as much. But I think it's just anything that can kind of get people into music and be expressive and try to get something new.
Yeah.
People who break the rules create something that you want to listen to.
Yeah, and it's always the people who are the most frustrated by that are the ones who aren't doing it. They're just like, you know, I don't get why these kids like this music. It's like, because they made it. That's why. You know, it doesn't matter if you get it or not. They like it and they're doing it. The best thing you could do is respect it and, you know, probably learn something from it, right? Like the next generation is always steps ahead. Whether you think they are or not, they're always steps ahead. They're approaching things from a place that's literally built on the past. I think you know, I've been lucky enough to teach music a little bit, and I always go back to, you know, I teach the foundations of music. I teach like the history of music. I try and touch on as many things as I think are important. And then one of the big things I do is I open up the discussion to what is important about music to you, or what is important music, and I'm always really excited when I do it because I'm constantly hearing music I would never go out and listen to. Like I wouldn't even know it existed, some of them. Like kids now listen to more, I think they listen to more underground music than they ever have before.
Oh yeah, my daughter is a big inspiration to me because I'm coming from this whole jazz thing and the progressive rock, but she's showing me all these underground bands that she's really into. A lot of underground music, a lot of female centered music, a lot of international world music that I might not have picked up on.
Yeah.
Because I'm in my podcasting, I'm always looking for different things, so I kind of go that way anyway. But it's cool to have a 20-year-old. Is my daughter, she's out there, and she's really pushing me to like, wow, I should get out of my comfort zone. I shouldn't just listen to Emerson, Lake and Palmer or
as much as you want to, right?
Listen to something I didn't. This guy's a DJ, but he's doing something cool. Can I have
Right.
that kind of thing at a keyboardist? Oh, well, he's on a CDJ or whatever. But if you think about it, one thing I was looking at, I think Amy Winehouse had a producer that had been a DJ, and the one thing I saw this documentary, the one thing he brought to the table was he knew how to get a hook. He knew how to hear a groove. And so if you think about when you look at Amy Winehouse's Back to Black album, a lot of that album is so tight because it's like the guy was groove focused.
Yeah.
And he used like real musicians, but he had this ear from listening to all these records.
Right.
And knowing how to DJ, to knowing what the crowd would like. So he took that capability, and then I got more respect for that kind of thinking. And that like you don't necessarily have to be a musician, but if you're a music curator, you're a music historian, you know the grooves, you know what songs. Like Dr. Dre, you get guys that can like, wow, they know so many albums, so many rare songs, and they know what works together, maybe in a way that you didn't know, and that's kind of cool. And, a traditional musician sometimes, oh, well, you can't play this, and you don't know how to do a major seventh, this, whatever, Hey, music is music, and some producers are just as creative as anybody that can play a Stradivarius or something.
Definitely.
So I guess when we would talk, I kind of deviate from the questions a little bit, but I always talk about
That's all good.
music production and the digital audio workstation and your like preferred method. Do you like to record in your home DAW, or do you go to a studio and have like a demo, or is it a little bit of both? Do you do like a merger of all different types of things?
Well, since COVID, we've been recording at home in our home studio. It's fun to get out of the home studio. Sometimes we'll go to like Joshua Tree or like nearby places just to change the scenery and just rent like an Airbnb for a weekend or a week and write. That's always really nice. And obviously the songs reflect the space, but mostly we've been working home, and trying to work around the construction and the loudness of LA. But that's how we did Higher Love, and we mainly use Ableton, Logic, and it's where we're sitting right now. So this is where we are most of the time.
You try and bring like the studio vibes, wherever we go. So she mentioned that like a while ago, before all this happened, we were renting spots in like Joshua Tree and different locations, and just like get an Airbnb for a couple of nights and bring our gear there and just write from that perspective. And that was a lot of fun. That it's still the same program. Nothing's changed about the program, or nothing's changed about the instruments. Yeah, but your headspace has changed, your environment's changed, and it's interesting the music that came out of that. We've only put out blocks. We put out another single called Like Fire. We got like tons of tracks. We have so much music. It's the thing is. Oh, go ahead.
No, I wasn't talking.
I thought you were gonna say.
I was giggling.
We've got so much music, but it's like we're it's not like we're not going to release some stuff. We might not release. We might release all of it, but it's like right now what we're focused on is this project and curating it the way we want it to be heard, and then eventually we may release a lot more of what we did. There's we just heard this interview with Flying Lotus, and he was talking about how this single he did with I think it was him and Anderson .Paak, and that he wrote and recorded the song 5 years ago, but just never thought it was good enough, and then finally put it out. But that's like just sometimes what it takes, you know. We've got a couple of songs, like we got one song in particular that we wrote at the way beginning, like a couple of years back, that is just coming out on this new EP that we're going to release. So, you know, it just we weren't sure. We loved the song, but it didn't have a home until now.
We didn't know its birthday yet.
Yeah.
Well, I was watching this documentary on Frank Zappa, and Zappa used to keep all these tapes of his live performances, and then he'd have all these reels, and then his wife said he would just go through them and take something from like 2 years ago or 6 months ago or whatever, some live, like he'd find something, oh yeah, here's the hook off of this live show. I'm going to take that and I'm going to mix it with something I did last week or something I did 2 months ago. And I find that I started like really taking that kind of philosophy. Like I keep this big archive of all my stuff, and then I like to go back, you know, a couple years to something I think didn't work, and then take, you know, because you're coming back at it fresh, and you're like, wow, I actually had something here, and then work on it. Or I'll go and take something to like some of my other friends who play bass or guitar, and use that to, you know, drive like a new development. You know, have somebody else's input. Take a fresh look at it, or sample it, and then change it up. And like I do a lot of samples of old stuff I did, and I find that like if you take that kind of approach to like you sample your own work, and then you chop it up, and then you rejigger it around, it can kind of, if you weren't getting inspired, and suddenly like, oh, there's all this new inspiration.
Exactly.
But what do you feel about, do you use samplers a lot? Like today, a lot of people are into like sampled clips and clip-based, you know, launching of how they record songs. I mean, a lot of structure in some of the modern recording systems are based on you kind of doing samples of your own thing, sampling a drum, sampling this, and then moving it around and resampling a sound, some revoicing, you know, modern sense. Do you guys do a lot of that, or do you kind of just stick with the regular instrument nature?
It's a combination of both. I mean, we sample drums. Sometimes we record live drums. Sometimes we sample them. You know, but that's I would say we in the very beginning, especially when we were first writing and experimenting, like we would try and use like heavy samples from songs, like stuff that we liked that we wanted to just flip. And then unfortunately you run into the wall of clearing. You know, if you want to put your song out there, you got to clear it. So, you know,
calm down, Kanye.
You're right. Yeah.
You can't clear that.
Yeah. You don't have to, you could just put it out there, but that's a whole other headache that, you know, in terms of us just wanting to get music out there, we were like, you know, maybe we'll come back to that idea. We still love that. But drums, I just like, you know, I'm old school with like, you know, Dilla type beats and stuff like that. I love stuff like that. So I love the idea of like, you know, just sampling all sorts of drums and rearranging them in interesting ways. And not even like full drum cuts, just like a kick, like a individual kick, snare, hats, percussive instruments, and build them the way that we want to. And I'm not a drummer, but I'm not a drummer yet. I'm working on it. But I like to think like a drummer. I like to think about what would a drummer do? How would they, you know, I think about, you know, the Carter Beaufords and the Abe Cunninghams and the, you know, Sheila E. But for real, like we got to think about all sorts of different types of drummers and percussionists, you know, and what would that feel like? And then on top of that, we trust our own creativity in terms of, you know, our own songwriting ability and our own ears. And, you know, one of the things for me, one of the most fun parts is, you know, Summer is so creative in a way that I'm not capable of. She has like just like this freedom that is not like not it's just not built around like what is like, you know, I don't want to say typical, but I mean like, yeah, it's not conventional. She doesn't just write a song. She doesn't write from a perspective of I need people to like this. You know what I mean? Like I do sometimes. I have that hang up where I'm like, well, what sounds cool? You know what I mean? Like I have to take my head out of that sometimes in order to be free. She's just free. He'll just write something and it's like the jazzy, it's like, but then it'll get like dirty, but then it'll come to like this really pretty place. And I'm like, how did you do that? Like, how did you do that? I have no idea. And then she's just tweaking knobs and doing stuff. And she just does it. It's not like, you know, again, it's not from a place of like, it has to sound good or it has to sound pretty. She's just going off of an emotion and letting the music come out of her. And it's, for me, that's actually the most inspiring part of writing together is she puts me in a place of like awe, you know, and then I get to just add to that.
So Summer, do you get like in this kind of headspace where you let music kind of just take you? I mean, I've heard, like, I feel like I pull from like this muse. Like there's this thing, I feel like there's a muse, right? I started as a poet. And so everything I do is kind of stream of consciousness based on stacks of poetry I wrote. And then I'll look at something I wrote, but I won't really focus on it. When I go into a recording, I do total stream of consciousness for most of my lyrics. I'll look at something and then I'll let the music take me wherever it's going to go. And then I'll kind of just let it go, stream of consciousness, kind of let it just feel like it's kind of coming to me. And I don't try to think about it too much. I try to let it come. Is that kind of how what you do? Is let it kind of come to you?
That's my very favorite way to play music is like, I read this book, Effortless Mastery, and it helped me kind of reconnect with how I used to, my relationship with music as a child, which was really free. And like my main goal was to feel free when I'm playing. And I totally agree that I feel like we all have those muses. The muses come, and that's why so many people write similar music at the same time. I feel like it's like, well, here you go. This idea needs to be heard. This idea needs to come to form. So I'm like really free and all over the place and creative, and it's more just the process. Like I love the process. And what John is really great at is he extracts, like he'll be like, that, do that again. Like I probably never record it, and I would just play for an hour to be like this total like free jazz situation. And he can ground me and make a song from that. And you're really good at mining the gold. Like he really has ears for it, and then we can build more of a pop tune around that.
And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, the sampling sense.
He's sampling me.
I'm sampling her.
You're like the DJ kind of technique I talked about with like Amy Winehouse, like you can find a hook.
Right.
Like a lot of times, like when I was with bands, we like in the 70s, when I was with my punk bands, like we'd be in a basement for like 2 hours on a reel. We just put it down and just go for 2 hours, and then I go back through the thing and I say, here's the hook.
Right.
Here's the lyric, and then I go and I come back to the bands and say, hey, this is the stuff we should work on, because I can kind of hear it. And it seems like that's what you like producers and stuff, and that's the kind of nature. And even like drummers are very into like drummers are like the core of like rhythm of any song. And so I've heard a lot of bands I've talked to will spend tons of time trying to get the rhythm section of a song down. And it's kind of like it's a lot of work if it doesn't come easy. And a lot of times, it looks effortless, but a lot of times a lot of work goes into it. And it's like the lyrics and other things can come in different ways. But like the drums is something that's kind of like you have to kind of find that hook. But other parts of the songs, I kind of let it happen in other ways. But
right.
And sometimes what happens is like because of her approach to writing. That helps me to be really like wild with the drums. We have this song called My Stop, and it started the beginning of this, the song actually happens almost in 3 sections, and the beginning sounds very like, boom bap, hip hop, jazz kind of, stuff. And that came from, she was just playing these this beautiful piano part. It sounded so dope, and I was like, well, that's easy. That's a slam dunk right there. I can just like, you know, just put, real nice, like, Quest style, just behind the beat kind of feel, right? And then, we're listening to it and we're like, yeah, but you know what? It's got to go somewhere. So then, she kind of took the chords and played them, on, we've got behind us right there. I don't know if you can see it, but that's a 73 Rhodes right back there.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, Summer gets on that and she starts playing and it just feels good, so but it's different than the piano, right? The sound is different. And the way she's approaching it, she's playing it with a different style now. It's got a different like yeah. So like now I'm like, all right, I want to change the drums up. So now I'm bringing in more of like that kind of a little bit more of a breakbeat kind of feel behind it, where it's just like, instead of being like a instead of like that, now it's coming more at like a and it's changing up. Right, exactly. It's still got that behind the beat feel, but now we're introducing some more electronic kind of vibes to it. We get to this third section and we're both just stumped. We're like, all right, we know it's got to go somewhere. But then, she's like, what if we just go what? So then it's just like that freedom of just like, we can take it somewhere else entirely is like, okay, cool. So then she starts reharming the chords and I'm like, this is cool. Like, it took a little bit of time, but then I knew, like, drum wise, I can go completely like electronic, like, like, trying to think of like
progressive music. You can change like your rhythm. You can go polyrhythms. You can change a rhythm. You can change the timing. You can change the key. That's what I like about like Yes and Genesis. You get these songs and they're like little sweeps. You go into this one section. Yes. It's, this speed, and it changes to a different key and it changes to a different emphasis. I like to use a lot of progressive rock techniques from bands like Yes and Genesis and even like bands like Mogwai, but they do a lot of interesting things where they kind of go off and come back and go off. Very classical type stuff, or even jazz fusion type orientation is that you can go and kind of break it out, go crazy, come back, go out, come back, change the rhythm, do this. What I find I've been doing a lot lately is using analog drum machines. Mm. I use Moog and I use a lot of Eurorack drum machines.
Yeah.
To create these really kind of not sampled. I don't want to sound like a real drum. I actually want to sound like something that's kind of like a drum, but something that you never heard from a drum, and that gives you kind of like Alexander Cortini or like Nina Trent Reznor type of ideas.
Sure.
You take a lot of noise concepts, a lot of ideas of like Buchla or additive synthesis concepts where you take interesting noise to create percussive capabilities, and you do things a little off the time and different things like that, where you don't want to be like an 808 or 99 perfect.
Right.
I'm actually going for like Tonight's the Night kind of Keith Richards off the beat. Glitchiness is kind of where my head's at lately. I'm going to like take LFOs to trigger things to be glitchy on purpose, to be a little off time on purpose, because I kind of want that kind of brokenness that you get from like the Velvets or like Alex Chilton's Big Star. You get this sound sometimes where that gives you a lot of personal vulnerability if you're not, you're kind of in that space where you don't have to be like trying to get the hit, but you're trying to do something else. You're trying to be more like a feel machine, what you're doing behind you. Like Wurlitzer or Hammond B3 or Moog, Mini Moog, they're like feel machines. They give you that ability to express yourself in a very natural way as a musician compared to some of the electronic stuff today.
Yeah.
Not that it's not cool, but like taken a classic instrument like that, or even like a Yamaha piano, or like any kind of acoustic instrument, or organic sounding instruments, or what my feel is lately.
Definitely.
We live in a soft synth world that everybody can get anything they want, but it's somehow the surface controls on these analog synths or the feel of like a real electric piano or something, that there's something it gives you the song an edge that I feel is cool.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's the tactile part. It's like kind of like, the difference between creating in, Logic or Pro Tools or something like that, and then going and working on a board. Like, when you're touching the board, you're like, it feels more, there's something that feels more real, more tactile. So you're just like, all right, you're it's an extension of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's what I think people miss in the modern world is like if you don't go and master your Ableton like you're using an old Neve board, you're kind of missing out. Like with Pink Floyd, I saw an interview and they were talking about Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, and they said they were all in the board doing all the overdubs all together as a band, and they felt like that was part of the recording session as the band. It wasn't the engineering session; it was actually how they constructed those songs.
Right.
Those boards, they were using them to actually map out the sound.
Interesting.
And
Yeah, each one of those.
Yeah.
Every time you turn that knob, you're making a choice. That is an instrument. It's the same thing. Like, all of it comes down to the same exact thing, which is just, we're doing our best impression of, vocalizing our feeling, right? And that can be, through the guitar, the piano, or any instrument, whatever, saxophone, it doesn't matter. The triangle. You play it soft, you play it loud, you play it quick, you play it slow, but every single one of these things, including working at the board, including how you're EQing that sound, how you're shaping it, are you compressing it, are you adding effects? Every one of those things is a choice that is another tool of expression. I always try and tell people when people tell me something sounds auto-tuned or this or that, I'm like, I don't know what you mean. Like, if you're telling me that you're not feeling what the artist is doing because it sounds too perfect to you and you like the imperfections, I get that. Maybe you're just not connecting to it in that way. What I don't get, or what I don't necessarily agree with, is when people are like, these rappers use auto-tune or these singers use auto-tune. I'm like, but a lot of them are using it on purpose. Just like a guitarist would use an effects chain, you know what I mean? Like, they're using it. Yeah, it's a tool.
Because you're using it, you're using like a spring reverb because that's what you want,
Yeah, that's the sound you're going for. That's what you're trying to get. And I think that's the thing. Again, that's the thing. You see these techniques that are not heralded as the way to do music, except it works and it makes something. So everything's an extension. I think you just have to kind of be like her and be free.
You get at it, you get like Jack White using a $100 Sears and Roebuck guitar.
Exactly, like the Black Keys.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's like a lot of times if I'll use a Casio if I want to use it, right? I'll go get, I'll go hit a trash can and tape it onto my sampler, or break some glass and grab it, or lately I've been using this Swedish synthesizer from Teenage Engineering at OPZ.
Yeah.
It's a tiny little thing. It looks like a remote. And you can build really interesting drum beats on it because it has this ability to do what are called subcomponents, and maybe that's too complicated. But on every 16 steps of this sequencer, you can put 16 different subcomponents of modulations on every step.
Wow. That's on the OP you're talking about?
Yeah, it's like an OPZ.
Yeah.
It's OP1 that was the first one they did, but this OPZ is a sequence-focused Teenage Engineering thing, and it has this idea.
Oh, nice. I don't even know about that. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, and what I like to do is I actually like to record it into a Zoom and actually record it in real time, changing those subcomponents in real time. Then you get something that you can never get from normal programming, because it's kind of it feels more organic because you're kind of doing it in real time. And it's kind of like the way I use my Moog. It's I will put down my Moog and I'll do all the control surfaces and record it in real time. So if you do it real time, you're playing with the spring reverb, you're playing with the ladder filter, you're changing the modulation. If you're doing all that as part of the playing of the instrument, it creates like very unique sounds that you can't really replicate every time. And so it gives you like point in time sounds that you put down on like tape. It becomes solid there, but that comes like that's what it is. And then you kind of live with it, and then you work around that. So the limitation of recording, that you put some limits on what you can do, so you're not living like the grid life, but you're kind of living with the capabilities of your machines and making it like very unique, kind of like a painter. Like, okay, I'm going to do that brush stroke, and that's what it is. And that might layer on top of it, but that's what it is. And
Right.
that's my approach, the way I do it. But it's kind of old school. But I use new techniques, like an OPZ as a new machine. But I used it without running the MIDI on it. I just did it the way I wanted to. So it's like you can take something new and then run it a different way.
Right, for sure. And all like every instrument, it doesn't matter. It's all still valid. It doesn't matter when it's from or what it does. It still works. It's just how you use it.
Yeah, somebody wants to use a vocoder with auto-tune, but their voice is unique, right? I use vocoders to create Josephine. But how I use my vocoder, I use it to create a character. I actually change my voice to a soprano and then throw all these effects on it to get it to sound like a female version of myself.
Yeah.
Right.
So that is a very unique thing that you're like, yeah, I'm using a bunch of technology to do that. It's not my straight voice.
Right.
It's like just like any like a hip hop guy is using a vocoder, but that's his voice. Or that's her voice. And so when it goes through, it's gonna be unique to that artist. And so that's you can't that's what they choose to use. The tools is like whether you use the plastic guitar or whether you use a $5,000 guitar. What does it matter? It's like if you get the result and the fans like it, and the people are listening to it, then you got it.
Right.
There's fans everywhere. You'll find an audience anywhere for the type of music you're into if you believe in yourself. I think every musician that doesn't give it up realizes that like they're passionate about what they want to do. And then the audience finds that passion and is attracted to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's cool about talking to people in the indie world is, I grew up with a lot of guys that gave up, back, I'm in my 50s. And the guys when I was 18, 21, they gave up and they don't play anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never stopped. And so it's like you get where you're going to go because of the belief in what you think you can do, whether or not the world, believed it. The Velvet Underground weren't big in their time, but everybody knows they're one of the greatest bands ever existed.
Right.
Alex Chilton's Big Star wasn't that big, but all these alternative bands in the 90s name-checked Big Star, as an influence. So a lot of times, like you think about William Blake, he wasn't well known in his time, but he's like one of the classic poets. So you should not do your art just because you're not in the top 10. You
For sure.
do your art because you love what you're doing.
Yeah. That's the most important part.
So when is the target for chapter 2 of Blocks and the movie? Do you have a target date?
So we're getting ready to release the second single, and we're actually going to be releasing a music video to go with Higher Love. So that'll be kind of the teaser of the movie, that's like the climactic part of the movie. And then we're going to release a second single called Skyride that he was talking about that we actually wrote a long time ago, but I'm glad we waited because it's a perfect piece to the story we're telling. And then the EP is going to come out before the movie. So the EP will probably release this summer. And then we might release the film then, but we're also looking to get it into some film festivals, and a lot of the film festivals want to premiere it. So it really just depends on where that goes. But if that's the case, we're going to hold out until we can really launch it correctly.
It's like a play. You can't publish a play if you want to put it on.
Yeah.
You have to keep it unpublished or nobody wants to do it.
Right.
Yeah, people want to premiere it and that sort of thing. So it's just cool. Like, it might take a little bit of time, but one of the things that we've been kind of learning through all this is like, that's just kind of how it works sometimes. It doesn't stop us from writing still or creating. It's just kind of like it's all happening simultaneously. What usually will end up happening is just that we'll have like years of music to release as soon as we release this thing. So it's fine. It'll come out. But the target is hopefully the music video within the next couple of months, and we'll once we have it locked down and everything, we'll do release information, we'll let you know for sure.
Sure.
And same thing with the next single and that sort of thing.
Well, I always like over the 2 years I've been doing the show, I bring back artists all the time when they have a project to talk about. So I've had many guests over the years that we do like release episodes, like on the cusp of some project coming out. So if you're interested in doing that, we could do that.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool because
Definitely.
So is phase 1 and phase 2 of blocks in the film?
Just two.
Just two, and then we'll kind of see how it goes from there. The film especially has been it's a real experiment with a lot of ideas that we wanted to do. So we'll see how people kind of respond to those ideas, and we'll see how much it takes and what it takes and everything like that. It's been a really incredible process. Like, it's been a lot of fun. It's been challenging. It's expensive, but
I think it's a cool thing because you think about it today, people are so visual, and as musicians, we're always trying to find that niche and really visual. I mean, that's why I've been doing audio podcasts since 2018, and now I'm doing a video one, but there's a reason.
Yeah.
The video podcast is actually the new thing. And so podcasters, we're all kind of converting to video, and we have our little bugs in, here and there. But it's people. I think the idea of doing a film is really cool. I think it's a good way to integrate with fans that are so into the 2-minute, thing. If you can get fans to get into a longer form exposure of your art, it's always a good thing. I think so. Doing live performance, doing film, working with other artists to get into visual areas, working into video games and films and stuff is something I've been working on real heavy as well. So
very cool.
It's really cool that I think you're going the right direction for this type of thing, even though it's a lot of money. But
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm glad to have you guys, Power Couple, on the show. This has been streaming on my Facebook. It will be saved on that channel and be there permanently. It will also be pushed up to YouTube later. And we always convert all these video podcasts to our traditional Anchor FM, which is all audio. And in there, it will go to Spotify and Apple and 9 other podcast platforms that we've been on for a couple of years. And so that's kind of what we were known for. But it will still go out there, and we'll push those versions on our Instagram and Facebook as well.
Awesome.
Links and click and actually, put you as a referral, link you. So once we say your name of your band on our Instagram, you'll see it in our story. You'll see that we talked about you. So that
great. We can share it with our fans.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I'm hoping to eventually see all the bands I talked to live one day. Or one thing we wanted to do a couple of years ago, we were talking about taking all the guests that we have and doing like a festival.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be fun.
Of all the bands that we ever talked to, and we've talked to like almost 40 bands now. And so we think that would be a cool thing to kind of create a festival based on the bands that we talk to. And so if you're into that, we'll be looking to figure out how to do that once things get cool again. But
yeah, definitely. I really
miss
festivals.
Yeah. Cannot wait to get back out there.
Yeah, we're doing collectives. As it's like you create a collective. Like, okay, well, this is a podcast collective based on you were a guest on the show, and then everybody's a guest on the show as part of this collective, and then we created a whole new thing. And that's what you do to get a scene going. But thank you for being on the show. I appreciate it. It's really cool to hear about all your ideas and your projects. And you guys seem to really be synced, in what you're doing. It's cool to see a duo. 'Cause a lot of times I do bands, but duos. I've done maybe 3 interviews with duos, and they're always very interesting because it's a tighter connection. You were able to. 4 people hard to handle. 5 people.
It's true.
When you're trying to create something, it gets a little confusing.
A lot of cooks.
Too many cooks, or there's one cook that's more than another cook, or whatever, and there's all these dynamics. But it's interesting to see the kind of the dynamic that you guys have is cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We really appreciate you having us. It was wonderful to get to talk to you.
Well, thank thank you, and we'll be pushing this out. It is on our Facebook. You'll be able to see it there as soon as they end it. It'll be there. I think you see it on the page. You'll see that there on streaming below. But thank you very much for being on the program. Everybody, go check out Power Couple. We're gonna put their link. Their link tree is running on the bottom, so you can always grab that. You can't click on it. We've been asking StreamYard, like, can you make that clickable? But it's not. Thank you very much for being on the program. We'll talk to you again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good night.